Hi, in this film I'm talking about what is anxiety. In the first part I'm going to explain to you why you have the disturbing, unpleasant and frankly mysterious physical symptoms that you have. And in the second part I'm going to tell you about the 5 doors to anxiety. At least one of these doors you must have passed through to leave yourself open to anxiety. Once you understand what these doors are, of course, the best thing about doors is you can go one way through it, but you can also reverse your steps and come back through it and close the door and become free of anxiety. But the secret, of course, is knowing what the doors are and then knowing how to retrace your steps. The first experience people have of anxiety usually is troubling physical symptoms. Heart beating or pounding, sweating or flushing, hot, tingling in extremities in your fingers and toes and legs, a buzzing in the body, feeling faint or kind of consciousness disturbed, difficult concentrating, occupied mind, blurred vision, tunnel vision, fuzzy vision, difficult to follow a conversation, string sentences together. To be honest, the symptoms of anxiety are really quite varied, but they're all disturbing, they're all unusual, they're often out of the blue, and it's difficult to understand why you're having them. It might drive you to your doctor, you might push your doctor to have some tests done. In the end, though, the symptoms of anxiety are a consequence of extreme physiological, biological arousal. If you think about it, for millions of years, our ancestors have been avoiding violent death. And in fact, it's an interesting thought, you are a direct descendant of the first people that lived on the earth. If you weren't a direct descendant, you wouldn't be here. And so your ancestors have successfully avoided violent death. And they've done that by developing a physiological system linked to a psychological system that perceives threat and responds to it in an absolute millisecond, an instant. If a saber-toothed tiger was to creep on one of your caveman ancestors, in an instant they're running, or they're fighting, or they're freezing. The fight, flight, or freeze system. I'm sure you've heard about it. But the relevance of that to you is this. You are experiencing the exact same physiological, biological arousal that your caveman ancestor had. But look around. Are you being threatened by a saber-toothed tiger? Is a knife-wielding or spear-wielding or whatever you like wielding assailant coming upon you? No. So we have the age-old and biologically ancient fear response system, but we live in the modern world. We don't have those same kinds of threats. So what happens is our fear system responds way, way, way too strongly to threats that we perceive. So basically, anxiety is an overestimation of threat. Now you might say, but I'm not under threat. Thank you very much. I have a job, I have money, I have family, I have security. But you see, the threat that you experience does not have to be life-threatening, as I've said, but it can be any kind of threat. It could be threat to integrity, it could be threat to self-esteem, it could be threat to your future, it could be perceived threat to almost anything you like. And that brings me to the 5 doors. So if you've followed me so far, you'll recognize that anxiety is an overestimation of threat. You may not recognize the threat that you're under, but you will have gone through one of these, at least one of these 5 doors. Let me explain them to you. The first one is the need for control. Do you need to be in control? Is it important? If you pass through the door of control, then you like to control the things that you experience in the world, and it's important that you have control, but you're also intolerant of uncertainty. You don't like uncertainty, and you try to minimize uncertainty. The trouble is that uncertainty is inherent in life, and obviously the more successful you get, the more uncertainty that you have. Standing here making this film today, my chance of being killed, of dying, is 1 in 1 million. That's as good as it gets. I'm not doing anything risky. 1 in 1 million. If I was to do parachute jumping or scuba diving, it's about 7 to 8 in 1 million. Still a fairly low risk, but there is some risk. If you're intolerant of uncertainty, if you have to be in control and cannot accept any risk at all, you will become anxious and you will worry. The second doorway that you may have passed through is to start to confuse worrying about things with productive problem solving. Now, we all have problems to solve, and we can use productive and non-productive strategies to solve those problems. Productive strategy is constructive thinking to an end. Unproductive strategy is to constantly think about what ifs and spin these thoughts round and round and round. And as a general guide, if you think the same thought more than 3 times, you're worrying. And we can think of worry as the thinking bit of anxiety. If you're confusing worrying with productive problem solving, then you're likely to be anxious. The third door that you're likely to have passed through is that you have started to develop the habit of catastrophic thinking. It's going to be a disaster. The whole thing is going to be a nightmare. It's never going to work. It's going to fail. I'm going to be exposed as a fraud. Everyone will see that I'm completely useless. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to live in a cardboard box and eat out of a tin. That's catastrophic thinking. If you've passed through the door of catastrophic thinking, you potentially have become quite practiced in exercising and practicing these kinds of thoughts. These thoughts will make you anxious, and so we need to come back through that door and shut the door on catastrophic thinking to recover from anxiety. The fourth door to anxiety is an avoidance of emotional issues and emotional things. Emotional thinking, if you like. It's almost an avoidance of being in touch with your emotional world. Now, everyone has emotions, and they're a source of information. Not always accurate information, has to be said, but they are a source of information. If you become frightened or fearful of emotions, and if you avoid emotions, it leaves you open to starting the worrying process, really getting going. Because worrying is one way of avoiding emotions. Whilst you're saturated with emotions and you feel overwhelmed with unpleasant emotions, it's actually often used as a protective strategy. So if you go through the door of avoiding emotional issues, you're likely to make yourself anxious. The fifth door to anxiety is to pay a lot of attention and to overemphasize the importance of physical symptoms. Now, any physical symptoms that you have are a consequence of your threat system being activated with the overestimation of threat. But if you focus on the physical symptoms, and if you put your attention on them, and you really push hard to get a medical solution to a psychological problem, it will perpetuate your anxiety, and it will create a non-productive problem-solving focus. So if you're overly attentive to what your physical symptoms tell you or what your body's doing, it is one of the doorways to anxiety. Now, I've outlined the 5 doorways. You don't have to go through them all, but I guarantee that you've been through at least one and probably 2 or 3. If you want to know how to retrace your steps through these doors, if you want to know how to shut the door and never have to go through the door again, and it's entirely possible, please put your email in below and I'll send you some information about how you can start to move away from anxiety, get rid of the troubling symptoms and get on with your life free of this overarching sense of threat and the problems that brings. I hope you found this information interesting and potentially useful. I'm Dr. David Purves. Put your email in and I'll send you some information about how to be free of anxiety.